record, so I'm talking a little bit about the nationwide crisis. But here in California, in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent, it costs $42 an hour. You have to earn $42 an hour, either as a single individual or as a dual income household. $42 an hour. This is called Out of Reach. You can Google it, Out of Reach report. The National Low Income Housing Coalition publishes it once a year, and you can dive deep into not just the state of California, but all the way down into Alameda County statistics. You can also look at Tennessee if you really want, but across the United States, they do this analysis that basically tells us our minimum wage is $15.50 an hour, our average renter wage is $33, and a 2-bedroom housing wage is $42 in the state of California. In Alameda County, it's $47. So in Alameda County, if you want to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, you need $47. That means that a minimum wage worker has to work 109 hours a week to afford that. That's more than 2.7 full-time jobs. And then if you wanted to look at a 1-bedroom apartment, it's 88 hours and it's 2.2 full-time jobs. So that's the 2-bedroom on the left and the 1-bedroom on the right. I think it's great to be able to track things. So the Out of Reach report goes back 15 years, so you can see year over year over year the increase. But I use that as an example to sort of tell us where we're at and what the reality of the situation is on the ground for people who are struggling to find a place to live and struggling to pay their rent. So last fall, after all of the cities had completed their housing elements, who here knows what a housing element is? Most of you, that's wonderful. State of California requires that every locality in the state every 7 years write a plan for their housing needs. And the state of California also assigns us a percentage of the growth that the state expects to grow by. And for the last 40 years, California has done nothing but grow. And the population has done nothing but increase. And we have not kept pace building as much housing as we need to accommodate that growth. So the state is now dictating to us, this is how much growth you need to have. So after every city in the county had finished its housing element, the county did a county-wide housing needs assessment. And so here are some of the statistics. Over the last 20 years, the county grew by 230,000 people. Cities grew between 9 and 15%. Dublin way overshot that. So did Emeryville. But they significantly grew beyond that 9 to 15%. I think Dublin almost doubled in size, and Emeryville grew by almost 100%, 88%, something like that. But some of the other findings, obviously new housing construction has fallen short of the needs, we haven't kept pace, housing prices have exceeded income increases, and renter households are at risk. So this shows you where some of that growth is. You can see Dublin is very dark because it grew by 138%, and Emeryville grew by 85%. Most cities, though, grew by 9 to 15%. Sunol actually dropped in population. It's the only place in the county that did. But that 230,000 people, you know, if you assume that you have 2.3 people per house, that means that we needed to have built 100,000 units, right? My math isn't great. What else did we learn? We learned that population growth was going through the roof over at the far end over here at 140% of AMI, meaning the folks who are earning above median. We grew in that area more than the Bay Area as a whole, and more than California. So Alameda County had a really fast uptick in higher income households. But then over here on the right, wait a minute, that's the right, this is the left. Over here on the left, we also see that we grew in extremely low income populations. So our populations where we see our most vulnerable, that increased, not as much as the Bay Area as a whole or California as a whole, but we still see that as a significant growth, almost 4%. So what did that mean in the middle? We actually lost middle income. And if you have any amount of money, you have a little bit more mobility than you do if you're extremely low income, which means that you picked up and you left Alameda County. So we see a migration out of the county into, Stockton and Modesto and some of the less expensive housing markets for our middle class populations and for our just at the top of the low income populations. So when we talk about housing needs and the RHNA, the housing needs assessment, the regional housing needs allocation numbers, we break it down into two different ways. One is who is here right now, and we have 69,000 households in Alameda County who are paying more than 30% of their income in rent, and about 30,000 of them are paying more than 50% of their income in rent. And that's a statistical benchmark. If someone is paying more than half of their income in rent, they are at risk of homelessness. They are just one paycheck away from losing their housing. Their car breaks down, they have a health care cost, and they don't have health insurance, or they can't pay for their medication. And that choice between putting food on the table and paying their rent becomes that very difficult decision that they're trying to make. And we know that the revolving door of homelessness is made up of those folks who are paying more than 50% of their income in rent. The future need, and what the state of California told us, is that we're going to grow and we need to build 28,000 new housing units across the entire county for a new population that's not here yet. Now, whether or not that population shows up, we don't know, but that's what the state has told us we need to build. But right now, what we're concerned about is that 69,000 and the 30,000 of them that are at risk of homelessness every time something bad happens. So if we talk a little bit about the regional housing needs assessment and supply and demand, I think it's important to note that we have built units in the last 20 years. We have been building housing units, but what housing units have we built? We have a shortfall of 20,000 units over the last 20 years at the 50% or below area median income level. We have a shortfall at 80% of 13,000 units countywide, and at 120%, we have a shortfall of 23,000. Those are the numbers that the state told us to build, and that's what we did not build. Now, all of that housing, 120%, well, 80% or below, really requires subsidy. It requires some amount of local government resources to come to the table to help subsidize, because the market cannot perform at that level. You cannot expect that the cost of construction can write down the cost enough so that you can actually rent to a household at 50% or even 80% of every median income. That's not necessarily true for 120%. 120%, that's basically market rate. That's normal people who are making above median income, but we did not build for that population. Who we built for, and we built more than what we needed to, was for 120% or above. And we outperformed what the state told us to build by 23,000 units. 26,000 units. What does that number say? 26. I don't have my glasses on, everybody. So we overbuilt luxury housing over the last 20 years. And that means that what we are looking to build for are people who are not at the extremely low or the very low income population, which requires government subsidy. But we also didn't build for our 120%, which is just plain vanilla sticks and bricks, first-time home buyer type units. We didn't build those either. So here in the Tri-Valley, this is a new slide for me, but these are the numbers for the Tri-Valley: Pleasanton, Livermore, and Dublin. And this is, a significantly larger number this time than in previous years. So you can see that across the board, everybody's getting more, but the Tri-Valley also got more across the board with this new regional housing allocation. So let's talk a little bit about what happened. I said this a little bit at the beginning, and I wish I could actually walk around. I wonder if there's a, okay, yeah, all right. So this is in 2000. The average purchase price in 2000 was $384,000 here in Alameda County. And what you needed to earn was $85,000 to afford that $385,000 mortgage. Now, that's because interest rates in that moment, so this is tied to what actual interest rates were. But the average income in 2000 was 64. So there's a difference of almost $20,000 of what the average income earner was earning and what it would take for them to buy a home. So even though 384 seems so low, doesn't that seem low right now? It seems so low, most of the population couldn't afford it, and we had this gap, this red is the gap. Now we keep going up. By 2005, the average price was probably closer to $450,000. You needed $98,000 a year to afford that, but what people were earning was $75,000. By 2006, at the top of the market, 2006, 2007, the average price was $632,000. People were still earning $75,000, and what you needed to afford that was $131,000 based on interest rates at the time. Now we see the foreclosure crisis. We see the dramatic drop. In 2010 and in 2012, this is when in Alameda County it was actually affordable for the average person earning an average wage to afford the average price of a home. It took the foreclosure crisis to make Bay Area houses affordable to most people. And so you can see that we're right there. You needed to earn $85,000 and most of us were earning $81,000, and you needed to earn $84,000 and most of us were earning $80,000, the average. But then by 2013, we see this dramatic increase in the prices. And now we're here where the average purchase price is $1.2 million and you need to earn $237,000, and that is frankly before the interest rates just went up. So we haven't recalculated this since the interest rates went up. And the average income is $129,000, so it's half of what you need to earn in order to buy homes. So what does this mean for your kids? What does it mean for your brothers and your sisters and the people that you know? It means most of us can't afford to live here anymore. And the only people who are actually buying homes are coming here from Silicon Valley or San Francisco, and they're coming into our county because it's more affordable than Santa Clara County or San Francisco County. But let's talk a little bit about rents and what did rents do during the same period of time over the last 20 years. What we see here is that in 2000, we're talking $921 for an average price of a rental, and now we're at $2,200, almost $2,300. And nowhere do you see a significant drop in rental prices. Isn't that interesting? The foreclosure crisis happened, the price of real estate goes down for several years. We're not just talking a 6-month blip, we're talking about 4 or 5 years when the real estate prices really came down. And it took almost 5.5 years, 6 years for it to recover. At no point did our rental prices drop. And I think that's really critical for people to understand that the renter side of the equation never had any kind of relief. So who can afford to rent? And this sort of gets us into, looking at what are general, incomes of different types of job classes. So home health care workers, healthcare support staff, part-time workers are earning $25,000 to $35,000 a year. Food service workers, housekeepers, office admin, they're earning $35,000 to $50,000 a year. Tax preparers, truck drivers, mechanics, roofers, postal workers, paramedics are earning $50,000 to $75,000 a year. You get into your real estate agents and your surgical technicians and your physical therapists and your librarian and your social worker, they're $75,000 to $100,000 a year. Those are all people we need in our community in order for our community to work, correct? Like, we're not gonna survive without our healthcare workers or our teachers or our paramedics. We need those people in our community. These are our neighbors who help our entire society move forward. And they make a significant percentage of the population of our county. So let's look at homelessness now. So again, homelessness is really an economic crisis. It's those households who are paying more than 50% of their income in rent, who have some kind of economic hardship that comes at them, and they are suddenly unable to make rent and they become evicted. So we can see here what rents were over the last, we started in like 2004, so it didn't start as far back as 2000, but 819 is the average rent starting there, and you can, for a studio apartment, not a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, but a studio apartment, and you can see that the housing prices for those studios have done nothing but go up. And then you can see how much income somebody on SSI is earning. And so this is a fixed income, a disability income, a senior citizen income, and you can see the green represents the portion of income, of rent that somebody on that income level can afford. And then the bar is, or the line graph is the homeless count over time, and you can see the significant increase. As rents go up, you can see the significant increase in our homeless populations. So what is homeless housing? It's really paying the difference between what is available for rent, which is about $75 a month, and what it costs to rent a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment, which is a gap of between $750 and $1,300 a month. Now, what usually pays that gap, $750 to $1,300? That's your project-based voucher. That's your Section 8 Housing Authority voucher, which has not increased significantly over time. So our housing authorities have always played the role of helping our most vulnerable cover their rent in market rate housing out in the community. And as our population of vulnerable people have increased, our resources to our housing authorities have not. And so they're still getting the exact same amount of money as they were getting basically in 2000. If you look at inflation, it hasn't increased significantly. So homelessness, we need additional resources, and Jonathan will come up here and talk a little bit about this. This is one of my favorite slides from our Home Together plan, which is our plan to end homelessness. And what this is basically saying is that without an increase in homeless funding and without an increase in subsidy to keep people in those homes, where the difference between an SSI income and the actual cost of renting, if we can't increase that, I'm getting to the end of my time here, so I've got 5 minutes. Okay. If we can't increase that, homelessness is going to continue to increase. And it will take a significant new investment, the green line, to actually end it. And can we end it? Yes, we can, with money. It's a money issue. The federal government is the source. We pay taxes. Every single one of us pay taxes. And every federal program is funded by our tax dollars. And every senator and congresswoman who is out there is making decisions about how to spend our tax dollars. And the way the housing crisis has occurred is because our housing department has not received, our federal housing department, HUD, has not received a substantial increase in revenue in the last 40 years. So, without an increase in revenue from the federal government to spend on housing, we're not going to see a relief to this program unless locally we make decisions to spend our own money that way. So there is a proposal to put a regional housing bond on the ballot in 2024. It's coming from the MTC and the Bay Area Housing Finance Agency. They're looking at $10 to $20 billion to put on the ballot. It'll cost between $100 to $200 a year based on what your assessed value is for your single family home. Commercial real estate will also pay part of the tax. What we would see coming into Alameda County is a significant amount of money. At $10 billion, you can see that Oakland would receive its own allocation, and we would see the county about $1 billion, $984 million, if it was a $10 billion bond. Every county in the 9-county Bay Area would receive funding. So Santa Clara would receive funding, San Francisco, Marin, Sonoma, Napa. One of the things that people talk about when they talk about building new affordable housing, and I'm happy to answer questions on that, but I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm trying to go fast now, is the cost of construction. And construction continues to go up. I want to just say that the cost of construction primarily is labor. That means we're paying people to do things. That means people are earning a wage. So if we want to try and cut housing costs, we're really looking at, well, okay, then the trade-off there is you're not paying the going rate for construction workers. So there are ways to try and reduce the cost of affordable housing, and we're working on that too. But for most part, I think it's important for us to recognize that the cost of construction has gone through the roof in the last, 10 years. Production, that's 52% of that regional housing bond. It really means new apartment construction. Preservation really means acquiring older apartment complexes and making them affordable and rehabbing them and making sure that they are long-term affordable. Protections is no longer something that we're funding. Flexible funding is really going to be first-time home buyer type programs and homeownership programs. And last, I just want to say that we are in the process of taking people's comments. Please look at this website. It's called AC Housing Needs AC. And we are asking for folks to take a survey and tell us what your highest housing needs are in your community. What housing problems are you as a family facing, your neighbors facing, your city facing, and give us the feedback, because that will inform the priorities for how we would do an expenditure plan for that bond if it passes. Okay, so far what we've heard is sheltering unhoused people is the highest priority. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. We have been out in the community doing meetings like this, taking feedback, talking to the community to hear about the housing needs. And these are some of the things that we have heard from. I'm happy to share these slides. And then if you would, please do go to the website and